Elizabeth, great to see you.
Nice to see you too, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. I'd love to welcome everybody back for another episode of CFRs and the team at whatmatters.com. We had an amazing conversation yesterday.
We did. We spoke to Christina Wodtke, the author of Radical Focus, one of our so recommended books.
Absolutely. And she's got a second edition coming out. And we got a chance to sit down with her. And for folks who don't know Christina, she is one of the experts on OKRs, wrote a book that has been read widely, worked at LinkedIn, worked at MySpace, as well as Zynga, as well as Yahoo, and has been one of our go-to coaches that we send folks to who ask us for help. And so we got a moment to sit down with her. We talked about the book. We talked about OKRs. We talked about also the differences of the what matters approach and the radical focus approach. I think everyone's going to really enjoy this conversation.
And I don't think we really need to say anything more. I think we should just get straight to the interview. You up for it?
Let's do it. Hey, Christina, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you. It's a sunny day, as you can tell, in beautiful Palo Alto. And you?
Oh, it's doing well. I wish we could be going for a walk together since we're pretty close, but we heard you are writing a new book, not a new book, but a revision to one of our favorite books. Tell us more. Why now? What inspired you to do a revision to Radical Focus?
Well, I think I sneaked the launch on you because it's out now. The second edition of Radical Focus is out. Yay! The audiobook's a couple days after it, but it should be any day now. And there we go. Radical Focus, and the Kindle book's up, and it's been really wonderfully received. People are making me cry all the time on Twitter and in emails. So I'm so happy. I'm so shocked that this book has been successful, and then needing a second edition has been crazy. Although a second edition was definitely needed for sure. So to get to your question, Ryan, when I wrote the first Radical Focus, I just quit Zynga. I was like sick of industry. I was kind of angry at a lot of things, but I loved OKRs, and I started using them to figure out what do I want to do next. And obviously that turned out pretty okay. But I was consulting a lot of startups at that time, and I was like, why can't you focus? What's wrong? But they'd be like, oh, and this, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this. In fact, I'm advising a Stanford senior right now, and she's like, and we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this plot, and we have this deal with Lucasfilms, and et cetera. And they get so excited, and I'm like, how do you make money? And so by talking to them, I realized they really needed that OKR because the world is so full of opportunities, but they needed the focus. So I wrote this book, and I was like, oh my God, I'm writing a book about an acronym. Why will anybody read this? This is complete nonsense, right? So I thought, I will trick people into reading it by writing a story, because I'm a big fan of 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which I don't know if you've read it, but it's lovely. And so I decided to base it on the story of, I kind of mashed up 3 startups I was working with, and then added a little something extra, told their fable, and then explained the framework. But what happened is, after that, all these big companies took to it, sort of like the way they took to Lean Startup or Agile, something that was invented for startups. All of a sudden they want, give me a slice of that goodness. And a lot of things I suggested for startups do not work for bigger companies, period. Cascading, I think, is at the top of that list, as you probably figured out. So I thought, I've worked with now big guys like Pepsi and IKEA and such not. Maybe it's time to talk about, what does it look like when OKRs scale, as well as when they're little tiny baby OKRs?
Yeah, I love the fable, which pulls you in, and you start rooting for Hannah, and you start rooting and worrying about Jack. It's like it takes you in, and then you unfold like really the power of what OKRs can do and the why. Sometimes like the why of these frameworks is lost in writing, and so that's what I really love about it. Christina, one of the approaches that I think you really emphasize in your book, it is in the title itself, is radical, radical, radical focus. I think for the audience of folks that really get drawn to OKRs, if you read Measure What Matters, it says, put together like 5 OKRs for your organization, right? If you spend time with us on more of the online team, we're like, actually, it's 2 to 3. You say 1. Tell us more about the power of radical focus and why 1 OKR is your go-to advice for teams.
I still argue for radical focus, thank goodness. At least I think so. But you also have to be reasonable when companies are really big. So I moved from 1 OKR set for a startup to one OKR set per business model. And sometimes it's a business unit. Because if you think about Google, which is probably one of the most famous folks to work with OKRs, well, how are you going to set an OKR that includes search, self-driving cars, and fiber? That becomes really hard to unite. Occasionally you will find one though. I've seen really good company-wide OKRs around digital transformation, or how are we going to leverage social, but those don't come around every day or every quarter. So most of the time, the company will set its OKR, and then people say, how does this work for us? And if it doesn't, you kind of set it aside and figure out, what are we doing for the company at this moment? But then again, you want to get down to the one. And there's a lot of reasons to really focus on one. The biggest one for me is always going to be the limits of our memory. So I'm lucky I'm surrounded by really smart people at Stanford, and working with the understanding of memory, you realize the old line of 7 plus or minus 2 has been wiped out. It's more like we can hold 3 or 4 things in our head while we're working. And so every time you make a decision, every time you say, how am I going to spend this afternoon? Or should I take this meeting? It's really useful to go, what's the most important thing for me? And the only way you can do it is by having fewer OKRs, because they're not OKRs. They're objectives and key results. And by that, I mean, you have one objective and you have 3 to 5 key results, usually 3, but some people get excited. And that means I'm walking around every day holding about 4 things on my head. But wait, I'm thinking of the business unit and my own team. Now I'm walking around with 8 things in my head. And you can see where, as it gets bigger, it becomes harder and harder to remember what's the single most important thing I can do. And the thing is, by putting everything in OKRs, it gets messy. If you use KPIs, or health metrics, as I call them, then every week you can measure and make sure nothing is falling apart while you're focused on your giant push, but you're still focused on that giant push.
I love it. I love the simplicity of one, right? I think that has been the why of the 5 to 3 to 2 to 1. It's that just narrowing of focus. I think it also puts pressure on teams to really prioritize what matters, and that's really powerful.
Oh my God, 100%. The other thing that I've seen with this is it causes you to change how you think. So I think that a lot of people run around like Kermit, going, I've got to do this and I've got to do this. But if you're forced to take a little tiny bit of time to be quiet and think about what matters, you can do things like sequencing. So my most common example is, why would you do acquisition when you don't know how to convert them to paid customers? Why would you do conversion when you can't retain them? So by doing a Q1 that's all about retention, and a Q2 that's all about conversion, and a Q3 that's all about acquisition, this is a really loosey-goosey example. But what you're doing is you're layering knowledge into the organization. If you spend 3 minutes working on retention, guess what? You don't forget it in Q2, right? So now you have, I'm really good at retention, and now I'm learning about conversion. Now I'm learning about acquisition. So not only does the company become more robust, the product, but the people become smarter and more capable. And so you're building a super powered learning organization that has a much higher likelihood of success.
One of the things that we recommend is every team be able to, craft an OKR, right? To capture the things they want to change, but you still need KPIs as well too. One thing I like a lot about the book is this fact that you call some of those KRs these health metrics, right? And you actually put them front and center. And not just that, you're also scoring and tracking them red, yellow, green. I really love that the book is more than just about OKRs. It's really Christina being there in your team meetings, kind of coaching and guiding your teams. Can you share more about this 4-box for folks that haven't picked up your book yet? What is this 4-box? How did it come to be? Tell us about this tool.
Oh, absolutely. The 4 square has got the most lame name. It's the simplest thing, and it works. Sometimes simple things work. I don't consider myself as a great visionary, but more someone who crowd surfed with a bunch of people who are really smart. And when I was working with startups, I took these ideas from Zynga, which is, of course, a John Doerr company. And that's why OKRs were like beat into my brain in a really useful way. And then when I started working with the startups, it was so hard for them. It was so hard for them to focus. It was so hard for them to get going. And I just lost the entire track of my brain. Question: how did that happen?
Oh no, you were doing so well.
I was doing so well, and all of a sudden it was like squirrel.
Foursquare. We were no. This is
So
it
what's
was
the quick sentence again? What was the quick question again? I was like so warming up for it, and then I'm like, nope.
The Foursquare.
Foursquare. Okay, first
yeah.
hit this
Where did
Foursquare.
Foursquare come to be? Yeah.
So I started taking something. I mean, Seeko's a really metrics driven company, right? Like they measured everything, and it was the most learning company I've ever seen in my life. And there's a whole other story there that I'll save for another day. But Seeko was really good at learning. It was bad at other things, but really good at learning. And so I took the Foursquare that Cityville had started using, and Cityville, if you remember, was a massive, massive hit, right? Bigger than Farmville for a while, and then the next farm anyway. And so Cityville had this beginning of a Foursquare that was sort of like the cover sheet for the metrics review. And believe me, at Zynga, we went through every single metric and looked at it and asked it and interrogated it and figured out, does it matter? Does it not matter? Are we going to look at it again? Woofda. So for startups, they didn't have a lot of instrumentation. And let's be honest, most startups don't have enough numbers to have statistical significance where that kind of A/B testing is useful. So I had to spend a lot of time getting them to think about metrics as their metrics rather than those metrics. Like everybody says, no, honey, we're not going to listen to what everybody says. What are the metrics that you need to monitor so you knew you're on the right path? Because product market fit is like a ticking clock, right? You're going to get to it or you're going to die, right? So what you needed is that level of focus. And so the Foursquare was like, okay, we're not going to look at 20 pages of metrics. We're going to look at only progress against the OKRs and these things that we don't want to go sideways. And that's it. And we're going to look at it every single week, twice a week. We're going to look at it at the beginning and say, what are we going to do? And at the end of the week, say, what have we done? And how awesome was that? And it's a very simple model, but it's robust because it's simple, right?
That is the Foursquare.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the other two are, of course, what are we doing this week? And what are we doing a little bit in the future? So that makes 4. For those people who are like, wait, I only count 2 squares, OKRs and health metrics. The other 2 are what are we doing this week towards the OKRs or the health metrics if things are going to hell, and what's coming down the pipeline.
I feel like in reading, I probably think that you and others in the OKR space kind of feel this way. In reading other people's writings about OKRs, you learn a lot. Like you learn about the companies that they're spending time with. You learn about likely the issues and things that they've run into. One of the things that I took away from the book as well is your reminder that sometimes OKRs aren't for all teams. And I think for us at What Matters, we try to recommend OKRs for all teams. And I think you have a unique point of view here. And so share more. When are OKRs not a fit?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, sometimes OKRs are not a fit, and sometimes OKRs have to be tailored to the company. Mm-hmm, so when we talk about OKRs not being a fit, it doesn't work if you don't control your time. So because the very first talk I gave about OKRs was at a design conference, a lot of design groups said, oh, this is for us. And I was just lucky enough to give the talk there. And so they were trying to apply OKRs, but the reality is that most internal design groups or consultancies are very much blown about by the winds of whatever product they're serving at the time. And so they could set OKRs, but they often couldn't make them because they were constantly having to deal with whatever they had to deal with. And this just depressed people horribly. It was really problematic. And so I started saying, service groups, just don't do them for a while. Take 6 months, take 9 months, just do it only within the multidisciplinary product groups for a while. The place where I started to see it work is actually in bigger companies that get big enough, they start to have capacity, like DevOps or design ops. Once they start having some capacity to meet their own needs and goals, then they can adopt it. But really, I think that happens around 500, 750 people, maybe, if you're lucky. So yeah, it just doesn't make sense to do OKRs if you're a service group. And that does include engineering. Sorry, engineers, but you are in service to the product. Unless you're also the product manager. Happy days. No sleep, but happy days.
This new version of the book kicks off. I'm just pulling it up. It's on my iPad. This particular technique depends on a culture of empowerment.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. That's another thing that's been interesting about being a very early adopter of OKRs. And my book was the first one out in space. So I started getting these calls very early, and I still get them, is folks are like, we're going to use OKRs to fix everything. And I'm like, no, you fix everything and then you use OKRs. Like, I wrote The Team That Managed Itself because I kept getting these phone calls, which is like, well, if you can't use OKRs to do a performance review, how do you do a performance review? And I was like, how do you do it now? And they'd be like, it's like, I realized suddenly a lot of really critical understanding of teams, which is in the literature, and understanding of being a good manager, which is also in the literature, was literature nobody wanted to read. And I thought, well, let's take the story fairy magic wand and do it again. So I really think it's important to think of OKRs as part of an overall management strategy that hopefully will lead to empowered teams, as Marty Kagan writes about it. Because nobody scales. Like, as a human being, you just will never scale, which means at some point or not, everybody's got to figure out how to delegate and how to manage. And it turns out if you hire poorly, you're going to be convinced that you're the only one who can fix things. So we really have to focus on who are the right people to bring into our team so that you can trust them. And I think when we interview people, we don't say, could I just hand a problem to this person and trust that they were going to fix it for me? If the answer is no, then you're not going to get an empowered team, and you're going to continue micromanaging, and you're not going to get there.
I think it's a good, like a label that needs to go on OKRs before, remove this label when your team is empowered and people trust each other.
Prerequisites, right? Now in the second edition.
Because if you don't have those two, you can't use them right. And a thing I do love about the book as well, too, is you bring in so many other voices from the community to talk about their experience with OKRs and the thing that they, love to lean in on. And so it's a recommendation to read the book, because that's you get all this new stuff there. This is a side tangent, Christina. Your definition of pivot, I think, is a fascinating definition, because I think maybe we all have it wrong. But
really,
well, I don't know. But historically, is a pivot when you change complete directions, possibly based on the stuff? It's not in your definition. It's share more. I really liked your definition. It's
very simple. A, I used to swing dance a lot, and B, so I know what a good pivot is. And B, I was part of very early lean startup. I mean, I remember being at a Web 2.0 conference in New York, sitting next to this dude complaining about a speaker. And the dude was Eric Ries. And we just ended up, talking a lot, reading each other's work. I went, I've spoken at the lean startup conferences. And the thing is, when I was teaching entrepreneurship for a while, I really felt it was important to know the difference between a pivot and a do-over, right? So a pivot is, okay, we found this market, our product's not fitting, but maybe another product. Or we found this product has a lot of potential, it's not fitting the market, let's switch to another market. So you're always building from a place of strength to a new place of strength. However, if your product sucks and your market sucks, do over, right? And that's the only possible answer. And I think that too many people are using pivot as a way of saying, we're not succeeding, we've got to change. And that's throwing away the baby with the bathwater, in my opinion, unless you don't have baby, and then it's just bathwater.
It's the nuance of the definition, which I think is powerful. Like, you have to acknowledge as a team when you are doing things over, this didn't work. And so we're going to try something completely new. But the pivot, when I was reading your writing, it really lent to the learning organization. Like, as you take these inputs, you have to pivot. If you're not pivoting, you're not really navigating with the times. And so I found that as a really powerful concept.
It is. We need to reclaim it from its original meaning. Sometimes language drifts. And the fact is that do-overs are so expensive. They're expensive in knowledge. They're expensive in morale for the team. But pivots say, look, we figured something out. Now let's figure the other piece and the other piece. And you can just keep going until everything clicks into place, or you run out of money, which is another reason I think OKRs are useful. Is I think one of the things that are hardest, I'm really interested in what you think about this, Ryan, is startups really struggle knowing when to quit. Maybe intrapreneurs as well. Like, when do we stop funding this thing? When are we never going to get there? How do we know? And I'm curious if you have seen this as well. When do you quit and when do you keep going?
It's a great question. The grit of the founder, the story that we tell is always really powerful, right? The stories you hear is they were trying and trying and trying and trying, and it ultimately worked. I think the part that's usually missing along in that journey is that they pivoted in this slight way. They adapted. They actually were learning as they were not succeeding and not seeing the growth and I think all the things that we look for in companies in the Valley. But when to call it quits, I think it's a powerful skill to be able to have, right? I think once you know what good looks like, once you know that maybe the approach or tact you're taking isn't right, I think you can look at the team and say, yes, let's do this over together, right? Or let's do this in our separate ways. I found your fable. It's actually coming to mind of, Jim, the venture capitalist, around once someone's heart, though, is out of the equation, right? It's over, right? I think the thing here, that's when you always have to really call it quits. If the founder and the founding team aren't there, present, actively steering this ship through all the tides, that's an easy time to say, hey, it's done, right? A company is not anything without its team, its founding team, its founders.
Yeah. I would love to share only slightly embarrassing story about me when I was a founder, which is why I care about this question, and another reason I like OKRs. So I actually started my startup, Kachina Media, before there were OKRs, before Lean came out. And I was just like building stuff and trying to figure out what to do and collecting, clients. And I was so excited. And we're like, oh my God, we closed O'Malley and we're going to be huge and stuff. And then I came across 4 Steps to the Epiphany. And despite the fact that it was self-published and there were no margins and the font choice was unfortunate and the diagrams were worse, the knowledge was such a knowledge bomb, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, oh my God. And so I Google around and I find Steve Blank's phone number. I don't know where it's going to go, so I call it. And yes, I am an introvert, but I'm also ate all those stories of startup grit, right? And I call him, and this woman answers. She goes, "Steve, I think it's one of your students." And I pick up the phone, and he says he's willing to talk to me, but I have to drive out to Half Moon Bay. And because I'm young and stupid, I was like, "Oh yeah, I've got a client down there. I have to visit anyway." Right? So I drove down. He spent 2 hours walking me through my business. And at the end, I realized I cannot succeed as a company. I had all the data I needed, and I realized this company is not going to survive unless I pivot into something that will destroy my heart. And instead, I started shopping it around, and I'm lucky to have met Reid Hoffman, and he bought it for LinkedIn. Nice sort of semi-acqui-hire, semi-IP hire, but it was because I had known what I wanted for my startup, and I knew I couldn't succeed, and therefore I knew I was going to get out. So when I started working with startups, I started saying, how would you know you got to product market fit? What does that look like? How would you measure that? And so at the end of every single quarter, if their only objective is get to product market fit, but the numbers aren't there, right? We're not getting enough users, or we're getting all these hints, but we're in hint land for an entire year. You can actually look at that learning and say, you know what? Let's close this down. Let's step back and let's pick another direction to take, or dissolve completely and even return investors' money. Shocking. I did that. And I think my poor angel VC fell over with surprise. It's like, you're giving me money back? That happens? But it's just one of those, I really think it's better to be the person who says, this is not working. I love you. I love the space, but let's shut down and figure out, rest, maybe sleep a little, and then decide what else we're going to do. I know I'm sorry, I don't mean to be a bummer, but I know.
No, it's not.
It's important.
This isn't talked about enough, right? I mean, it is the moment when because of data, because rather than having feelings that you can't really latch on to about why you're shutting things down or why you're pivoting, right? I mean, I think everything you just shared actually applies not just to small startups, but also to large companies. And when they create things internally to them, how do you know to keep funding something? How do you know when it's, run its course? I think when you put these things out there in a measurable way in advance, before you're actually at the moment of the emotion, it really provides a ton of clarity.
And you can change those numbers if you get real data. You always have that option. You're not locked into a box, but you have to make it as an intellectual decision rather than a pure emotional decision. 100%.
I think to all of our, I guess, viewers, it's the 4 Steps to Epiphany. I have a story as well too that's a little embarrassing as well with that book. That book really is. I was working at Microsoft. I was there for 4 years, and I was like, I'm going to start a company. I have this brilliant idea. I'm going to give my notice. I gave my notice. And right before leaving, I think it was the last day of work, my boss, Andy Ruff, put a book, 4 Steps to Epiphany, on my chair and said, wishing you the best, I think he wrote on it. And I took the train. I was taking Caltrain from Mountain View to the city. And I get on the train, open up this book that looks like a textbook. And I think I said, oh, shit.
Yes.
Like, I was like, I didn't do that. Nope. I didn't get out of the building. Nope. And it's just one of those amazing books in that search for product market fit. It's the search for product market fit is an incredible thing. I think by putting the measures up front, it helps you know if you're there or not. But I think one thing folks that end up finding product market fit will say as well is when you have it, you have it. It's this radically, I wouldn't say obvious thing, but it is a very palpable thing when you have great product market fit, when you see the growth, when you see all these things happening to your metrics that aren't just your effort alone, right? It's the thing you put out there, and it's not just your effort, but it's all the other parts and pieces in the world, colluding in a good way to say, this is working. Elizabeth, you had a question.
Yeah, you can't lie to yourself about you can lie to yourself about anything if you really want to, but outcomes tend to be a lot more honest than outputs. Checklists can make you feel good, but metrics could make you feel amazing. But I think, I don't want to completely say no to the emotion, because in some ways I think finding product market fit is a little like falling in love. You're out on a date and you're getting little tingles. You're like, maybe, but maybe not. And then they do something and you're like, oh, maybe they like me. And then, it keeps going. And then one day you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm in love. It's there. And they love me too. And it's there. And so that's the emotional side. I think if I went out on a date now, I'd be like writing down every signal. Okay, he did this, he did this, he did this. But luckily nobody has to put up with that these days.
All right, I have a question. So, Christina, earlier you easily slid the word into a sentence, and it was something that caught me in the book. And we recommend radical focus a lot, especially for startups and small teams. And so of course, kind of thinking in that entrepreneur space, but you mentioned the word intrapreneur, which I hadn't really twigged or really thought about. So instead of me totally blowing the definition of that, what do you consider an intrapreneur to be?
Well, can I do the long answer?
Please.
So I want to talk just a second about strategy. There's a lot of people use the word strategy, and it's big and it's messy and it seems to involve a lot of people planning. But I think it's really critical while you're reacting to market forces that you have to think a little bit about where will we be next, because you want to have a robust and sustainable company, right? And so at that moment, it's a really good time to say, how are we going to explore the way entrepreneurs explore? And I'm really lucky, again, that when I was consulting for a while in the early 2000s, I was hired by New York Times Online. And it turns out their entire management team had read Clayton Christensen's help me, Innovator's Dilemma. There, brain fart. So the entire management team had read Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma, and they responded to that by creating a separate company for the website that was down in Times Square. It was completely far away from the publishing group. The publishing group was always trying to shut it down at that moment because they're like, you're cannibalizing subscriptions, but because they were in a different physical space. And so that gave me my first taste of what intrapreneurship could really look like when it was taking the best of entrepreneurship. Going forward as a big company, again, you're going to have these moments where, like, should we move into this new market? Should we introduce this new product? At which point, creating a little small self-sustained group that can act like an entrepreneurship group and then goes to the company for funding when they start to have strong signals of success is actually a really awesome model for continuing to create innovation, because big companies are like sleeping bears. They just want to keep sleeping. And if somebody's making a lot of noise, they can crush them. But if you can actually, let that little bear cub out in the world to find its own berries. Oh my God, that metaphor escaped me. But you get me, right? You gotta let the entrepreneurs really innovate and even disrupt your own company if it becomes required. But sometimes it's just as simple as, should we put Mexican restaurants in Switzerland? Let's go find out. Let's be entrepreneurs about it. It can be big, it can be small.
I want to know the answer to that one.
The answer is yes, they need good Mexican food.
Thank you. So you have your entrepreneurs and you have your different teams. And as I was reading the new edition and thinking about implementing, I'm really startup used to, or that's not really good language, but I'm really used to startups. So the thought of implementing OKRs in a 5-figure team, just 60,000 people, I don't get it, and it would make my head explode probably. So I can't imagine a straight cascade working. You guys touched on it earlier. So how do you flow OKRs through or down across an organization that big?
Yeah, you kind of don't. There was
a good answer.
Well, I end up hearing a lot of stories about OKRs for some reason. And I was told the story about when there was a CEO who really believed in OKRs who went to Yahoo, but also was a little bit of someone who wanted a lot of control. And so this individual wanted to check every single department's OKRs. But at that scale, it took about a month plus, which meant that 4 times a year, the people were in limbo. They weren't sure what they should do. They didn't know what their targets were. And this certainly didn't serve Yahoo, which is a company that is very dear in my heart, having been there in the Yahoo days, which back in the original Yahoo people. So what you have to do is hire really well, fire very swiftly, give constant feedback. And then if you have these amazing people who are constantly becoming more amazing, the company can set their OKRs and they can trust everybody else to do alignment. And again, I was talking about it as, look at the company, ask yourself, what are I going to do it? If it's a department, it should be like 24-hour turnaround. Like, people give themselves too much time to get in their heads. So it's like, okay, we're hitting the end of the quarter. We're going to call the OKRs. I'm sorry. I know you're convinced you're going to get that one sale that's going to make you next week, but tough. We're calling them right now. We're doing our learning. We're doing our retrospectives. Okay, we're going to set it. And hopefully the company will set it very, very quickly. And then everybody else can say, what does this mean to me? And that does mean that there might be some moments where the head of a business unit has to talk to a team and say, well, your OKR doesn't quite match ours. But that's actually faster than looking at every single one and saying, we'll get back to you with feedback. It's better to say, if we don't get back to you within a week, go to town. It's on us. It's our fault. And we trust you to make good decisions. You got to let go. And letting go is really hard. And people have time being let go. I mean, not in the fired way, but I'm going to, speak to you as a VC. I have a couple of really good friends who are in the investing space, and they say, sometimes startups are looking for a boss. They just want somebody to tell them it's okay to do this and it's not okay to do that. And a VC is not your boss. They're the person who believes in you and is betting on you. It means you have to learn how to be your own boss, which means that when somebody comes to you, the manager, and says to you, okay, what should my OKRs be? You have to sit back and go, well, what do you think they should be? You just have to keep turning it around until people start building the habit of being empowered. And I have to do this a lot with my students. Like, okay, what are all the requirements? How many words should it be? Double spaced or single spaced? And I'm like, write something that's not too long that makes sense for me. And they're like,
I'm one of those people, so I can totally understand that. In your story, by the way, I totally want to be Jim at Starbucks holding court. So I have a long way to go, but I'm at least working on the coffee habit, though.
Yeah, he's based on one of my dearest friends and somebody else who was a VC who did that. And I kind of mashed them together and said, okay, we've got Jim now.
We've got the perfect Jim for the fable. The part you were sharing, the command and control structure versus the empowered team. Like, I think that's, if there's the label of the, it goes back to that label that you have to rip off first. Are they empowered and do you trust? The only way OKRs actually flow through an organization is if you as a leadership team can be comfortable setting your objectives and key results and trusting that the teams and empowering the teams to set their own. Like that's always been, if it's a regimented exercise, if it's the micromanaging, command and control, that's where it fails very quickly. And it's also why I think people have really bad experiences with OKRs. I'm sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's upsetting to me. So I was speaking at O'Reilly's incubator, and there was a startup guy came over to me and he said, I learned OKRs at Google and I decided they were bullshit. And he said, what happened to me is my manager said, I can't give you a raise because you didn't make your OKRs. And he's like, look at rework. It says, no, you're supposed to set high goals and you shouldn't make them. And so even at what's supposed to be the picture book version of OKRs, even there, it wanders, it gets misused, it gets misread. I mean, I had a fairly shocking revelation with a company I was working with recently who swore they'd watched all the videos and read all the books, and they were trying to manage everything they did only with OKRs. They weren't doing pipelines. They weren't doing everything that goes around it. And that's when you only have one stick and it's a hammer, and all you've got is screws, right?
I know Elizabeth has our closing question, but I do have to ask one more piece there, because it is this separation between performance reviews and compensation and OKRs, which is goal setting. Christina, what have you seen work well? Because I think we like that example there that you have of Google shows how it works so poorly, where I didn't meet my OKRs and therefore I got dinged in my career.
So in Amy Edmondson's book, The Fearless Organization, she talks about how VW had this command and control, very, very much the opposite of an empowered team culture. And they said, you must pass the diesel admissions or else. And or else was, you can't feed your family, you can't pay your mortgage. And so what did people do? They gamed it. And the same thing happened here with Wells Fargo. As a longtime Wells Fargo customer, I was just horrified that everybody was being signed up for accounts that they didn't necessarily sign up for. But I wasn't horrified by that. I was horrified that the company would say, everybody has to have 8 accounts or you can't pay your mortgage, you can't pay your rent. And that's the opposite of success. What you want instead is to be encouraging this culture of learning. Again, I keep coming back to the culture of learning because I think learning is the single most important competitive advantage anybody has, whether you're a tiny startup or a giant organization. Your learning will make or break you. So I was sorry because these people who were just trying to be good employees were suddenly given a choice of, food or hitting numbers. And, we all got to eat. So what you want to do instead is trust your team to look at the numbers. And if you have a timid team, and some teams really are kind of, they're scared because they've been in this abusive situation, the command and control for a while. So to them, I say, okay, it's a stretch goal, but it's like a yoga stretch, right? We're just going to just feel that stretch a little bit. If you're hurting, it's too far. I've done a lot of years of yoga and it's kind of nice to go, okay. And they're like, but I don't know the numbers. And like, yes, it's okay. You won't get punished for getting it wrong. You'll learn and then we'll move forward. So what we do instead of based on you hit your numbers, you get your bonus, which, by the way, there's tons of literature out there that says that destroys motivation. So yeah, don't do that. Instead, I recommend a combination of how did you contribute to the OKRs, right? How did you do the job that your steady state is? Again, it's almost reflecting the Foursquare, where health metrics is sort of the equivalent of what do you do every day in your job? You give feedback to your people. You maybe do some reports, like what is that meat and potatoes of the job as well as the goals. And then are you growing? And I'm a big fan of saying, are you growing is one of those key pieces. And then some companies want to put in one more thing, like, are you contributing to the company culture, or are you mentoring the people, whatever, magic XYZ they want to add. And then you write that up in the job description. You check in with people every week in your one-on-ones. At the end of the quarter, you actually talk through where they could grow and where they're succeeding. And then you can either give them a bonus or raise, or you can just file that away so that you actually can remember what happened in March when it's next January and it's time to do a review. And you do it on the combination of, how is this person really benefiting the company, and how can the company benefit the person, because that's what employeeship should be. It's a contract, which is I take care of you, you take care of me, we both do well together. At least that's my fantasy.
That's a
So
good one.
it sounds like the age-old, I'll keep a spreadsheet of all my accomplishments so I can give it to my boss in March. That kind of eradicates that, I would guess.
Yeah, because the problem is you need short feedback cycles. You need it on your product, right? The faster you can get feedback cycles on how your product's doing, the better off you are. Same thing. The faster you can learn that you keep interrupting people in meetings and they don't want to meet with you anymore, the faster you can learn that, the faster you can stop doing
I wouldn't know anything about that. Stop, don't laugh, Ryan. Christina, I want to ask you one question. We have so many people who send us questions about OKRs and they want to do them, but they're a little scared to do them. So I've just taken it upon myself to build a confidence library. And I hope you won't mind me asking, but I'm really curious. How did you get started with OKRs? And this is to help our lovely audience.
What was your first OKR, Christina?
Your first OKR.
The one I set for myself, or the one that was I set with my team? Because those are two very different things. I have a very, very fond memory of being at Zynga in the exec team meeting, there was a mess of us, and saying, everybody came here, the game designers came here because they were really excited about the possibility of social. Maybe it's time to get serious about social. And that was one we set. And we said, well, what does that even look like, right? Well, here's what it looks like for the company. And we came up with some key results for that. And then everybody else, like if you're Mafia Wars, getting serious about social means this for you. But if you're working on the platform, it means this, and it was a really good uniting OKR because there was enough meat in there that everybody could push towards it and learn from each other. When I set my own personal OKR, when I left Zynga and I was like done watching all the food TV and traveling to Thailand and stuff, I was like, okay, maybe I'm running out of money. Maybe it's time to work again. I really said, okay, here's how much money I have to make. Here's the health I want to have. And I was like, how often am I having back problems? How often am I having acid reflux? And I came up with metrics that I measured. And I have like the dumbest, simplest way to measure it. I have a New Year, NEU year calendar, which is a huge calendar on the wall. I don't even know if I can get you to it. I would love to try. And I just write on it. I have pictures of my mood. I'm doing mood tracking this quarter, but I'll put food tracking up there. I have so much stuff here. And every day I'm like, better or worse, because I can see the whole thing. And it led me to run tons of experiments because I didn't have a solution, right? There's no product in be happy with the work I do. So I kept doing the lean thing, which is, well, I really love food. Should I go to culinary school? Well, that's 4 years. So can I take a 6-week culinary program? Oh, good. Don't want to do that. Love food, hard on the body. Oh, should I work with food startups? Went in as a consultant, not a full-time job. Went, you know what? If I keep working in food companies, I'm going to learn to hate food because the margins are so thin. It's depressing. So I was like, okay, maybe I should teach. Instead of getting a PhD, I said, oh, well, General Assembly, well, back then, hire just about anybody. I can't say what they're like then. So I was like, okay, can I teach a night class? Did it a couple nights a week, loved it, scaled up, did it for a full month, scaled up, got a job at CCA. Did that for a while, and now I'm at Stanford. In a lot of ways, my own life was my goal to get product market fit. And for me, the product is work and the fit is happiness and the ability to pay mortgage. And I can't complain. It worked.
I'm so inspired. Can I call you? That's fantastic. I that would absolutely drive me nuts, by the way, to think about my life that way. But just the fact that you did, that's really cool.
Christina, thank you so much for spending all this time with us. I mean, what you've written in the first edition was something we shared, but this new edition really is a gift.
And so congratulations on it. It's wonderful.
Yeah, congratulations. We're so proud. We're so excited to be your biggest fans and to get to dig in. Because I think, we were talking before we started hitting record, but I think we both believe like with goal setting, putting these things down on, you actually can make the world a better place. The things you do, the things we work on together, the environments that we're all in. And so we're on this journey with you. And thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's nice to have fellow travelers.
Elizabeth, I learned so much from that conversation.
I know. I feel really motivated, and I need to process it. I really enjoyed it.
I do too. I mean, I think that's the beautiful thing about OKRs. You have to make them fit your style of work. I mean, for me, the things I took away from her book around, I mean, it's in the title, radical focus. We say go after 2 to 3 objectives. She's like, pick one, right? Like that's something worth thinking about. I think one thing I'm going to change is say, rather than say pick 2 to 3, pick 1, 2, or 3 objectives. But I hope everyone enjoyed that interview. I really did. And if you want to find the next edition of Radical Focus, we have a link below which you can find it. And I really highly encourage folks to read it.
And if you'd like to see more interviews like our interview with Christina just then, or gain more knowledge on objectives and key results, we would love to have you give us a like or even a subscribe. And we're always available in the comments below or by dropping us an email at hello@whatmatters.com. We'd like to hear from you.
We absolutely would. And keep up the momentum. Y'all are doing great.
Ryan, I will see you on our next episode.
Wonderful. See you soon, Elizabeth.
Take care, everybody.